Hello, everybody. I'm super glad to be here. Thank you, and thanks for AxCon for sponsoring this event. I'm going to dive into my introduction here in detail a little bit later, but I want to try to start with the agenda here real quick. And I'm going to do my best to talk through the slides. I haven't done one of these accessibility conferences, so this is the first one I've done. We're looking at a slide with agenda, and on the bottom left, we have a web application that helps designers manage content. And on the right, we have a conceptual diagram of the ability to change stylistic attributes across products. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to debut some new technology for dynamic media. This is actually my favorite part, is to debut new technology. So you're going to see something brand new today. And from a design perspective, we're going to talk about how you can scale your value add as a designer. And you can get your hands on this tool today. I'll tell you that how to do that in a moment. We're also going to be looking at enterprise content pipelines and brand orchestration. So that's basically creative supply chain for large companies, and how we deal in massive amounts of content through our channels. And we're going to look at the reactions to market of how we respond to events that take place in the overall market, and a little bit about spike events. And what a spike event is when you create some sort of promotional event where you have a large volume of customers that kind of flow in. And spike events are, you plan for those in, say, holidays or any given event, maybe a sporting event, something of that nature. We're going to be looking at smart images with intelligent compositing. We're going to be using an open source language called Stylables to do so. And we're going to be talking about pixel-based design tokens with the ownership of your experience. And what I mean about experience ownership is your ability to maintain the experience for all the users of your product, including those with using assistive technologies. And we're going to talk about dynamic personalization and the keys to stylistic time to market. That's how quickly we can get to market, which is super important when it comes to business and selling of products. And then we'll wrap up with some inclusive first design principles and problems. A lot of cool stuff today, but there's also some serious topics that we have to talk about on this front. If anybody, I'm covering a timeline. Now we're looking at a slide with a timeline for those of people who are watching this on demand and you want to jump around this video. I kind of put this sequence for you to understand where we're at. We're going to obviously debut some new tech. We're going to talk about business cases. We're going to go through a number of business cases with regards to the creation of images and images that help sell your products. And we're going to talk about pixels for the visually impaired. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with getting into the weeds on some cascading style sheets, otherwise known as CSS, and some controlled vocabulary. By the way, at the very end, there's a little bonus that you're going to love at the end. So I would encourage you to hang out. How you can participate for free. So if I were you, maybe you could pull up your windows side by side. This is going to be a very rare opportunity for you to dive in. So if you go to optica.com, there's going to be a sign up button here on the lower left. This is all for free. So optica.com, go to the sign up button. You'll enter your email address and password, and then that's going to send you a confirmation code. And then you'll come back and enter that code, and then you'll finally log in. And then you'll be able to get your hands on some artistic galleries, and you'll be able to play with some content. And I encourage you to do that. So while they're doing that, I'm going to step back and formally introduce myself. My name's Charles. I am a content pipeline enthusiast. I've been working in this industry a long, long time. Throughout the course of my career, I've spent approximately $20 million on digital asset management. For those who are not familiar with DAM, it's basically applications that help you manage your content, organize it, categorize it, put workflows around it, etc. I've done this at the enterprise level many times, and done a lot of work in obviously the entertainment space, but includes research and development, licensing, publishing, etc. Touched a global user base, which includes things like making search available in the native language and spending time looking at what it means to serve content in a localized region. So I've dealt with millions of assets and the most complex security models on the planet. My latest project was with Disney Plus in dealing with spike events to the likes that you would blow your mind, the largest spikes events known to mankind. On the personal side, I do a lot of content production. I love the concept around building franchises and franchise commercialization. We're going to get into those pipelines today. So I have a pretty good sized background in 3D graphics, and that led me to directed acyclic graphs, which are basically the way information flows through an application in order to render graphics. And DAGs, they call them DAGs. They're awesome. I would encourage anybody who's in the design field to understand what directed acyclic graphs are. It's really going to change the way you look at how you produce content and actually make you a lot more efficient in how you structure, your pipelines. And post-production compositing, that's obviously when you take something out of a 3D output where you render in passes, which is basically layers, and then you composite all that together, and you might do some finesse with like color adjustments or curves adjustments and things of that nature. I'm also visually impaired. I found this out when I was young. I'll get into that story as we get to that part of the presentation today. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we're going to look at some new technology right now. So for those of you who have gone to the website optica.com with 2Ks and created an account, you're going to land on a page that looks a little something like this. And so what I'm looking at right now is a web application for creatives to work with media assets to create images for various experiences. And along the bottom, we have a collection of galleries with different types of galleries. So we have retail galleries, we've got hand-drawn galleries, publishing, and some stationery. I'm going to start with going into the stationery studio right here. And so I'm now looking at a studio which has two galleries in it, one on the right side, which is hand-drawn trees. And for those of you who are in the design industry, you know that every website in the world today works with JPEG images. And the issue that we have with JPEG images is that they are static and they do not flex as you change color palettes. That's because they are matted JPEGs on a white background. They are static, and we have been in this world since I can remember, actually since probably the web was born. And so there's a vast limitation around this, because if you're trying to create an experience where you have, say, dark mode, for example, if you go into dark mode, it doesn't, your images are not affected by that. And obviously you can't just invert the images. We'll talk about that later, because they look horrible when you invert an image. So that's completely unacceptable. So what I'm going to do is go into what this tool does for you today. Is I'm going into a dynamic gallery here with some dynamic images. So I'm looking at some images of trees, and I am able to start to grab color palettes, and they respond intelligently. Now, keep in mind, these are not vector-based graphics. In other words, they're not described with shapes and color fills. These are actually rasterized graphics, which is where you have a color value for every pixel. And so this starts to vastly open up the world of possibility for us to have different types of color palettes and to fly through various forms of content. Okay, let's go to the notes and make sure I've touched up on everything here. Okay, So why do we focus on the dynamicism here? Why is this so important? And what does it mean when you enable your content to become dynamic? Well, basically, you're talking about speed and agility. Like, how quickly can you get to market? So I am now pulling up a slide that shows a timeline, and we move through our creative supply chain here. With we start on the left with shot creation, so that's like where you have your photography, or if you're working with a theatrical studio, you've got 3D shots coming through, or video, or in some cases you have hand-drawn artwork. So that's where we start with shot creation. Then we move on to stylization, and stylization is really where you start to apply your branded style. It's where you oftentimes do manual touch-ups, where you take a layered image and you're working in some sort of layered image application, and you're adjusting the composite and adding layers and maybe strokes, and adjusting curves and making everything look pretty. And then we move to business enrichment. And business enrichment is really where we start to categorize and put access controls, maybe contract with licensees to start to use our content. And then finally, we have delivery. And delivery is done through a number of different channels. It can be, a mobile app on your phone, or if you're in the web, it's coming through a content distribution network. What those do is make sure that the images are close to you. So when you're grabbing a web page, it doesn't have to go halfway around the world to find that image and bring it back to you. So CDNs put the image really close to you. And then we've got content management systems. Those are basically the way to aggregate groupings of content, which would be maybe the descriptions or the product listings that you have and the images together, so that you can deploy a new batch of content to the web and roll back and do all those particular things. But most of these there's a lot of manual steps in the middle of this. And those manual steps not only take time, but it makes us it slows us down with our ability to respond to the market. So when you traverse your stylistic time to market, that is the part where, like, okay, right now, what is this, March? So we're in March. Okay, right now, I guarantee you, in a lot of big studios with e-commerce or entertainment, they are working on things like Halloween now, because it takes you that long. It can take you like 6 to 9 months to go with a branded franchise from when you start to produce the products until you deliver them to market. And that's just way, way, way too long, because in the matter of 9 months, a lot of things can happen. Things like COVID can happen. Things like the war in Ukraine can happen. And when you have an arc that's long, you get into the predicting the future business, and it's very scary. All right, so let's walk through some use cases on how dynamic media can push us along and make us a lot quicker in that. So I'm going to go to the home page, and I am going to pick the gallery that has two fictional characters that look like a painted hand brushed style. So I'm opening up this gallery, and on the screen, it looks like I have 3 science fiction characters. They look to be semi-cartoon or hand-drawn, but these are actually, they come out of the 3D pipeline. So these are actually modeled characters in a 3D application. And for those of you who work in this industry, you know that when we come out of the pipeline for 3D, we get a bunch of layers, and then we pack those together in a composite, and then we finesse that. So this would be after you have finessed this and you're getting ready to start to productize this, either through licensing or putting this on a t-shirt or whatever. So really the challenge here is, what happens when you go into a new market? Like, think about these characters right now, and you want to traverse into a different market with a different ethnicity, and what you do here. So if you were, talking with the creative director, and let's just say we even want to take a look or a crack at what it would look like to change the ethnicity of these characters? Well, obviously, you're going to go into the DAM, you're going to download a file, you're going to open that up, you're going to maybe, if you've got it coming out of 3D, your skin tones are isolated, maybe not, maybe you have to hand draw those, maybe you have to actually create the mask yourself, which if anybody who uses like these stock websites with stock images, they're not layered, so you kind of have to go in and create your own masks. Well, what this tool does is it allows you just to click like that. Simple as that. So talk about speed to market. Being able to pivot into a different ethnicity, coming in, taking a screen, exporting that, okay? Pivot, new ethnicity, export. That's how fast that is. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about creative agility. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about stylistic time to market. Let's do another one. All right, so I am pulling up 2 images that look like maybe travel brochure or some sort of marketing campaign where we have 2 beach scenes and we have the 2 females shot from behind, and there's a sun in the sky. And so how would we go about changing the demographics that we're targeting and running through? Maybe we're going to target a different segment here. So in this, when you have dynamic imagery going on, you can just select the demographic that you're working. So now I'm rotating the images to put in kids, which takes out the women. I'm taking out the kids, I'm putting in teens, and coming back to the women. And then for those of you who are looking closely, as you know, you can't just slap on these images, because look at the flare from the sun, the lens flare is actually going over the image right here. And so again, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about agility. Let me go back to my notes here, make sure I'm hitting all these beats correctly. Yeah, let's do e-commerce. And I'm going to remind myself of a huge piece. Okay, so now I'm pulling up a gallery which contains a bunch of products, and the products have a looks like we have a franchise character of a dog who's cartoonish with floppy ears, very cute, obviously going to sell tons and tons of products as soon as we can get the next episode of this franchise out the door. And remember, now we're in the part of the pipeline where we're maybe conceptualizing products, or we're preparing products, or we're maybe working with our overall brand. I've had many situations where when I've shown what I'm about to show you to executives, there's been this response of, well, maybe we don't have the products like that. So you can take this and then pivot right here to change all the colors, like with one single switch. And as those of you who are in design know, that you can't just that's not easy to do. And so this is important because you can sit there and say, when maybe we started out with this darker blue tone, right? Maybe this is where we started when we were developing the script and, starting to shoot, the first episodes of this series. And we had kind of this idea, but then kind of midway through, we switched over to this lighter palette because it maybe had a little bit more energy. But the issue is that we already hired a couple of agencies and farmed out, lots of shots with marketing materials and models on them. So what do we do with that? Well, the cool thing about having these galleries and our branded abstraction is I'm going to pull in the shots that we did. So right now, I'm starting to import 2 PSDs files that have layers in them, and we're pulling them into the gallery that we're currently in. And so, yeah, That was the original when we had farmed it out and contracted. That's the color palette that we were using. But because we're using stylables as a language, like we can do that. Like that is how fast we're talking when we're talking about stylistic time to market. All right. The final thing is, what about the day of the event, right? So it's like, let's go back to the Halloween example. That's a good one. So let's go back to Halloween. And it's Halloween morning, say like 10 o'clock, and the sales from the website are not doing well, right? So I'm going into my gallery with the trees again, and we have a problem with sales because sales are soft. So like, what is happening? What is happening on the site? So we're gonna go in and we're gonna pull up the palette that we used this year for Halloween, and we look at that and say, oh yeah, maybe it was just too dark. Maybe in the world of e-commerce, it's a little bit scary to literally on Halloween to go a little bit too scary, and that people are not wanting to purchase products. So how do we roll out something, quickly? So here we go, we pivot our scene like that. We have this new look, it's brighter, maybe a little bit more fallish and fun. And then we just grab it and we submit that for approval. Once that's approved, that can get pushed into staging and deployed to the CDN, because we don't have days to deploy a new look. Like Halloween is happening now, sales are happening now. If it's taking you 3 days to deploy your look from the CMS, from the first batch that you had to the second batch, you're gone. It's like, it's over. The Halloween is over. So you don't have time for things like that. All right. So what does this have to do with accessibility, right? And there's a huge correlation here. If there's one thing that you take away from this event today, it's the correlation that I'm about to show you, okay? So what is this and why does this matter? Right now, I am looking at a picture of a bunch of dots and they're all the same color. And you're sitting there saying like, what is in that? So for me, I was hit with this when I was 15 years old, and I went to go get my driver's license. Super excited about getting a driver's license. I'm from Colorado, and it's kind of a spread out area. So in order to have any type of life, you really need to have a vehicle. And 15, you're going to go get your learner's permit. So I go in, and then I get hit with this test where they show me something like this and they say, state the number that you see in these dots. And I remember it distinctly because it was the moment that I had a culmination of a lot of things that come to my mind. I always thought that I just didn't know the names of colors. I didn't frankly really care or pay attention. But it was the moment where I realized, wow, the thing that was interesting is I could make out maybe something. And it turns out, I remember it was an 8. And the reason why they chose 8 is because they can fool you because it might be a 3, okay? So let's go back over to the app. I'm going to the home page for those of you who are following along. On the right side, we're looking at a gallery with a blank canvas. This is an empty gallery, okay? This is a gallery that has no stylistic algorithm programmed into it. This is blank, all right? So I'm gonna pull up, I'm gonna import my PSD file, okay? Drop that in. And actually, before I do that, let me switch colors because I can't see that color anyways. This is white. All right, so I'm coming here, I got this, I'm gonna upload my file here, import that, bam. I can totally see that. Was never a number, it says love. And that is profound because I'll tell you, this is the convergence that happens, right? We are now looking at pixel-based data when it comes to colors, which is basically what they are. That's RGB plus alpha, okay? And it happens to be that the very thing that is the key to helping those visually, with those with visual impairments, is the same thing that it was for creative agility, that's getting us to our stylistic time to market in an acceptable manner. This is the thing that, the only thing you take away from today, it's the same thing. It's personalization for one. We'll talk about this a little bit later because there's a giant problem in this space, but personalization of one. And some people have visual impairments. It's just the personalization experience. It's the same thing. Okay, so how does this work? All right, before we get into that, we have to look at our pipeline. And I'm gonna go into franchise commercialization and scaling your role as a designer, okay? So I'm looking at a slide right now where we have just a rough timeline where we go from our studio production to our physical product. So on the left side, we have a science fiction character in a 3D application that is obviously, something that's in a draft mode. In the next shot over, we're locking down our camera to focus in on the face of the character. The next shot we have is a little bit more refined. It is a finished, starting to become a finished image. And then our final image is that of a t-shirt where we put this image on a physical product so that we can sell stuff and make the company money. Another way of looking at this pipeline is, at least in my world, you've got the studio production where we got video, 3D and 2D assets coming out, intended for a giant theatrical release. There's a branch off of that for video marketing, but then the final branch is franchise commercialization. And this is where the vast majority of the design industry lives, at least from my perspective. It's my perspective. And this is where we have consumer products and licensing. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to enable that space with personalization while at the same time tackling accessibility. So if we look at our pipeline, again, we go through shot creation, branding, and delivery. We talked about that. In the middle here, we've got some beats in here where we have our passes coming out of the 3D application. We talked about that. We composite that together. We embellish it by making it look pretty and adding the brand. We organize it for distribution with access controls. We stage it, then we deploy it. The vast majority of designers and creatives that I work with live in this box right here, okay? So if you're gonna scale your role in a design capacity, you have to start widening this look right here. This centerpiece is really the creative director, where they're more responsible from getting from end to end, where they're going from the composite to delivery. And so what we're really targeting is this branch downstairs. You really wanna have your perspective be the full pipeline. And so the challenge with that is that the reason why you have trouble scaling your role as a designer is because you work with color palettes. Color palettes do not scale. You have to work with style, which, by the way, the entire tech industry works on style, CSS, cascading style sheets. You need to start looking into that. An abstraction of your brand right there into style is the key to getting there fast. Also, we've got the metaverse coming in, and I'm going to do a talk on April 5th about the metaverse. We'll talk about that here when I wrap up. But the metaverse is going to change this world because the metaverse is pulling everything towards 3D, okay? This is inevitable. The next picture I'm looking at is how we get from, say, a conceptualization of a digital product to actual delivery. And you'll notice on this one, we have the segmentation between product on the left side and tech on the right side. And the tech today owns the vast majority of the processes. And that is a small issue here because technology is responsible for the delivery of the product and the experience. They actually inherit all the responsibility of being available and having performance and all of those particular pieces. And all these people up that kind of stitch this thing together, okay, is where we start coming from the design and product side. It's like they're coming over this wall to to manage this side, and this is not balanced. And this is the technical debt in the design world is accumulating. So the next slide, we start to look at design tokens. Okay, design tokens are our means to convey that we have a primary color, and we're going to use a primary color, and we haven't defined what the primary color is. But at the end of the day, we can apply the primary color, and it will happen. We'll see that a little bit later in the later slides here. And so then we have this concept where we're connecting both worlds through design, pixel-based design tokens. And that is the moment where we can inject inclusive first design. Like we have mobile first design, this is inclusive first design. It makes your designs better when you start looking at high contrast, and when you start looking at dark mode, your designs become better. Okay, so inclusive first design principles and problems. By the way, again, this is your last chance. Get on the website, put your hands on it. You can upload your own PSDs, by the way, and you'll start to learn how to manipulate those. So I would advise you to do that. All right, let's look at a few shots here. So what is this? We have a giant campaign. We've poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into getting our message out. We're a pharmaceutical company, and we put this up on our website, and then all of a sudden people see this. Like, what happened here? Who owns your experience? So what happens is, this is what it is. It's actually a warning. We have a medical warning. The product you selected may be harmful to teens. Click here for help. This message disappeared, and I've seen this a lot. It's because of the use of assistive technology. Assistive technology is taking the experience away. It is lambasting and hard, it's just brute forcing the style away from how you've designed it, and it's hijacking it. Now, I don't mean to rag on the people with the assistive technology, but it's like this becomes a problem in a lot of cases, and you still want to own your experience. Here's another example. On the left, I'm looking at an image which I don't know what that is. Maybe that's a puddle of water in a gutter with some plastic floating. I don't know, it's just trash. I don't really know. On the right, it's actually a pizza. Inverting images is, I don't know if you've ever tried, take a photo of yourself and invert it. It's terrible. It looks terrible, okay? This is the part where we need to get into our pixels, and we can have these design tokens, which are free, by the way, and control the experience. So let's talk a little bit about the issues going on with this space. Okay, we need a solution that supports the bottom line. We're always talking about return on investment. I've seen time and time again where people talk about inclusivity having some sort of return of investment. I don't know that that's actually true, sadly, but let's not worry about that for the moment, okay? Capability versus compliance. We talk about compliance standards all the time, and compliance is a terrible world. In this world of politics, you've got to be aware of your terminology. Compliance is a terrible word. Compliance is one of those things where it's like, oh, I just have to do that to comply to get somebody off my back. But what we're seeing right now is capability. This is a capability standard. It's not a compliance standard. We need to start looking at it in terms of that. Legal hurdles. So this is amazing. I have been exposed to a situation where you cannot talk about a certain topic with executives across any number of these industries, because if you tell them that they have an issue with their product and that you tell them that there's a solution, they're then culpable. Okay? So congratulations, everybody in this meeting today, you're now culpable. There's no more plausible deniability for you. But like, wow, really? But what we've seen here is that tonal range is equal to high contrast. This is where it all comes together. It's like, we're not worried about compliance. We're not worried about all those things because we are actually providing personalization, and that's the solution. So the thing I kind of have here is like, is this the right path is for us to go on the compliance road and kind of beat that drum and have the legal fights? Or are we trying to champion capability and enable companies actually to make more money and respond to markets faster on the bottom line? I don't know the answer to this. I want to know who's, by the way, leading all of this stuff, like compliance definitions. I have no idea. I would love for somebody to get in touch with me, because I would love to know like the strategy of what's going on here, as I'm not really sure. I'm gonna pick it up because I'm a little behind pace here. All right. Oh, let's jump back over. So real quickly, I'm going to the home page, and here is the colorblind test that we saw earlier. Like I said, I don't even know what that is, but I go into that, and in this gallery, you've got on the left side the normalized version where you don't see colors. On the right is the original. In the middle is the dynamic composite. There is a button if you go down here to share this gallery. I would highly encourage people to share the galleries that are marked with inclusive design. So if you look at this one right here, where we go in and we look at the ability to change an image. Sorry, let me slow down a little bit because this is a good one. Look at the character in the center. I'm looking at a sci-fi character in the center of the screen. Look at this character and look at the two people riding the virtual motorcycle on the left. When we switch into high contrast mode, completely different composite. Completely different composite. This is how we can enable people that need visual assistance. Okay, so again, this is a good gallery because you can actually clear this out and you can upload your own photos, your own PSD files in here. And a way to share this with your friends is to click this and you got to share this gallery right here. Okay. Okay, so how does this work? Okay, and this is the warning sign because this is where we start to look at the stylables language, and this is where we don't become creative anymore. It gets a little cryptic, but I guarantee you, as if you're going to scale yourself a designer, you should really start learning this stuff because a whole new world is going to open up for you. It's going to be amazing. I promise. I promise. As crazy as this is going to be for those people who are really into artwork, this is kind of the coding side. So we're looking at on the left, we're looking at a shot from Hulu and a shot from Netflix. And how do we code up these buttons? Well, you know, the way it works in the code is actually you have a style, and that style is color blue. And so this is when the web first started. We did this. We color blue, color blue. Well, what happens when you want to change the color to a different color? You have a giant problem because everywhere in your code it says color blue. So what we start to use is these things called classes. And so you have a button class, and then that button class points to a style where it's color red. So now in a single place on the entire website, all we have to do is change that one value and everything will change. Great. CSS, that's wonderful, but that still doesn't get us there. Actually, it's this thing called SAS, which is dynamic CSS, where you actually define a design token where you say brand primary, brand secondary, and then those equate to numbers. Okay, so you never want to work in terms of color palettes. You're working in terms of design tokens where you're abstracting all of these stylistic pieces away. So when we use this, we're basically in this center lane of the layers here. This is where you're usually used to going into uploading your images, and trying to speed it up because we're going to run out of time. Pulling in your images and working with them in a layered capacity. So let me do this real quick. When it happens to be that you normalize these files, okay, you get controls that allow you to touch them all at the same time. Okay, this is how you get to speed. This is how you can quickly pivot an entire collection of all of your stuff to a new brand. If the creative director changes their mind, or if something happens on the ground, you can quickly get to that particular point. And then imagine when it comes to being able to actually do some sort of look across everything, where you're taking something and you add some noise to the background and you'll be able to turn it up and down, okay? This is where these other layers around this core layer is where you abstract the brand. Let me just pull up this here real quick and we'll throw to questions here very shortly. We are using, the gradient across all those images is the same. So we can put that and use that as our brand. Same thing with the frame. It's really only the character that's changing. So since we're doing this, That's where we really want to take advantage of the accessibility. And then finally, we're going to go into the stylables language. And this is where, so you see this, if you start tagging inside of your layers with this, and maybe we'll get into this in the Q&A, watch what happens when I go in and change the color. You can see the secondary color changing, right? And you can also see the complementary secondary color changing. So if you flag your layers with these values, this is how the dynamicism comes in play. One of my favorite here is this color X. Color X actually is the opposite of the background color. It'll turn to black once I go white. See that? So color X is how you can use high contrast experiences. Okay. All right, I'm gonna try to leave some questions because we're running out of time. So Taylor, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, let's switch over to a couple of questions. We had a few come through. One, are the images responding and changing by compositing in browser when they're being displayed, or is it displaying a static image that's getting switched out?
Wonderful question. It is compositing in the browser, but you can also use the canvas. There is a mode here to switch to a canvas compositor versus a CSS compositor.
Very cool.
Next question.
All right. If we define these different design tokens, is there an option to switch between them in the UI, or would users have to be using assistive technology?
No, you can use them in the UI. The best place to, if you really get into it and you start looking at this language, which frankly isn't that complicated, you want to start putting those in your PSD files, because that allows someone to email, like if you were to email a PSD file that has stylables language written in the layers, all I do is drop it in my gallery and it would morph to whatever algorithm the gallery is holding.
All right, we have two more. The first one's quick. Can this technology be applied to browsers?
Yeah, this is a browser-based technology. That takes me back to the comment earlier about some of the reaction I've had when it comes to e-commerce. So one of the questions is when you have this and you come in here and you're able to do something like this, it's like, oh, well, can we enable that for the users? Like, that would be cool because we could have all these experiences. But then the product team says, wait, we don't have any products that are like this. So it's really, yeah, you have the best of both worlds. You could, the renderer is open source, so you can put this in your website to where you could do dynamic styling like this. Whether or not you choose to do that is a choice, right? So it's your choice in order to enable that, or you just flatten it out and then you put the experience that you have today. But either way, you're going a lot faster. And by the way, before we drop off of this, I want to cover one more thing, and that is like bouncing to high contrast, or bouncing to this view. I've had situations where the conversation is blocked because they don't want to touch this from a legal perspective, right? Because that's not the real product. And you sit there and you say, okay, so we're making, okay, so we have people who need visual assistive technologies and we're making the choice to exclude them because we're going to make that decision for them because we don't want them to potentially buy a hat that they might not get the actual color when they can't even see the color in the first place. So that's the part where that's the problem with this situation. The other problem too, before I forget, the other problem with this is that the renderer and all of this stylable language is open source. So in essence, it's free. And so a lot of these companies, you don't get attention when you're free, right? If you're walking in with $1 million product, then actually they pay attention. But if you're offering something that's out there in the open source community, that people start, don't take it seriously. So that's where I would love, whoever's running that show with compliance and capability, I would love for somebody to get a hold of me in that. Next question.
So let's see, we'll close out with one more question. And before we do that, I just want to thanks to everyone helping run the show today. And thank you, Charles, for presenting. That was really great. And I actually learned a couple of things that I'd never heard of before that I'm going to be looking into. So Thanks everyone for submitting your questions as well. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to us on our various social media pages. But let's see, this question is regarding your character building and compositing. It says ethnicity is more than just color. It could entail different facial features or clothing activities. So how do you account for things like that? Is that part of this part of the process, or is that addressed later? How does that work?
Yeah, so the way you can address that is you can actually have a different composite completely for a different ethnicity. So if you think about it, think about your stack. You've got all these layers in a stack. And let's say you want to do an entirely different character. And then so you would create a whole new file with a bunch of different layers. And this tool has that capability to have a completely different composite stack for the same character for a different ethnicity. It's all just in how you choose to control your layers, tag your layers, and manage your comps according to your style choices. So you can do all of that.
Okay, great. Well, I think that about wraps us up. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and catch us in the next presentation.
All righty, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.